There's a point in the early days where companies used to take big risks to find the next big thing in gaming. Some would say it was a better time. You had to be innovative in order to stand out, but most companies were not that consistent. Some people will say that things are better now because the quality is much more consistent. However, a good chunk of the market looks stale and similar to its counterparts in my opinion.
They're the same picture.
Now, Konami at this point was putting up some Wilt Chamberlain-like numbers with their products. From some of their video games like Metal Gear Solid 2 selling over 7 million units, their Yu-Gi-Oh games selling over millions of copies, to the official Yu-Gi-Oh card game shooting up to the #1 most played card game in the world. You could tell they were feeling themselves. With all that momentum, they wanted to have another bottle of lightning to let loose. But instead of lightning roaring out the bottle, it was just a whimper. And that whimper was Dungeon Dice Monsters. Around the same time, the episodes for Dungeon Dice Monsters came around. The physical game came around as well. I don't blame Konami for trying it out. It's not some random bullshit they try to capitalize on a trend.
It's the biggest piece of dog shit.
For starters, this idea mostly comes from the mind of Kazuki Takahashi. He was known as an avid fan of tabletop gaming overall, and with chapters of Capsule Monsters predating the Yu-Gi-Oh we know today, and several episodes and arcs based around tabletop gaming as a whole. The other thing is that the trend at the time was figure collecting games. I remember seeing shelves stacked with HeroClix and HeroScape back in the day. Shit, even collecting figures not part of a game was all the rage back then, like Bionicle figures.
You see this fit?
From the top of my head, I think those figures were pretty successful, for a short amount of time that is. Same cannot be said for Yu-Gi-Ohs however. Now, there's a lot of reasons why the physical game failed. The reasons that are more gameplay related, I'll leave for later on in the video after I explain the rules of the game. Right now, let me list the reasons I and many others had. First being that the figures cost a lot more than getting cards. I can't remember the store price for the figures and the sets, and I couldn't find the answer on Google easily. The closest I can get for reference is an old review of the game from 20 years ago. And it seems like sets back then were $20 give or take. In the official card game with $20, I can easily buy 2 starter decks and start playing the game. $20 in Dungeon Dice Monsters is nowhere near enough for you to start the game. The starter set for reference only came with 4 monsters in the US. You need a total of 15 to play the game. If you only buy from this set, it costs $80 before you can even start to play the game with someone else.
What kind of shit is that?
Even if the starter set was $10, that's still well over the amount it takes to just start playing the card game instead. This game costs way too much to even play casually. Now if you really wanted to play the game casually, you didn't have to use the figures, you could just print out the cards too. But that doesn't support the company, and without support, there's no incentive for them to make any more figures.
We've got to have money.
Another problem this game suffers from is splitting the attention of the player base. This tends to happen a lot in competitive areas like fighting games. Arc System Works makes a lot of anime fighters, and while a good chunk of them is neat, there is no way I can give each game an equal amount of attention. The likely result is usually the game I'm already playing is the one I stick with until it gets old and the player base dwindles. Why should I play Dungeon Dice Monsters if I'm already satisfied with Yu-Gi-Oh the card game?
It don't make no motherfucking sense.
It's one thing if it's another format because I already have cards to participate in another format. However, for Dungeon Dice Monsters, I have to go out my way to buy the figures, the dice, and the price for all that is way out of my price range. And that's not even the half of it, because the most difficult part in all of this is finding other people willing to do the same thing and play with you.
Ain't nobody trying to hear that bullshit, man.
At that point, it's just easier to play the game that already has a player base. With that and a few more reasons like the Japanese and American sets being completely different, this game was doomed for failure. However, the light in all of this was that the most plausible way you could play this game with your friends was the Dungeon Dice Monsters Game Boy Advance game. Now of course you needed a GBA, which was $100 at the time, and the game on release was $40. It's a steep price at the jump, but in the long term, it's much less costly than the in real life game. Sure, you needed a friend that needed to have the game and the GBA, but let's be real, the Game Boy Advance sold over 80 million units. Everyone had one. The difficult part might be convincing them to get the game, but it came with a double pack later on, and honestly, kids were eating anything at the time. This kind of plays into the point I was making with the last video on Reshuffle Destruction. Sometimes the physical game is just too expensive. Even with that issue, you still want to enjoy the game in some way, shape, or form. And the answer was the video games for a long period of time. I'm surprised Konami didn't try to push DDM through just the games alone. That would have been much more convincing for people to buy rather than shitty figures and expensively fucked up sets that were GIMP. There was a time where Konami would host video game tournaments and finals for GBA games alongside the official card game. So it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for the GBA DDM circuit to be a thing the same way VGC is in Pokemon. Unfortunately, we're in the darkest timeline. So how is the game? It starts with naming the file and then it just dumps you right into the menu. Where have I seen this before? I go into the dice pool first just to try and see if I have any familiar monsters, and it puts me into the chest of dice first. Not seeing much here, I move into my deck, or rather the dice pool. Upon entering, I see 15 dice, so I can assume already that 15 is probably the least amount of dice you can have. Turns out, it's the least and the most. Now there's a lot going on the screen. So many symbols and colors, and I have no clue what any of it means. At this point, my guess was that different colors meant attributes, but it's a bad guess considering most of the dice are not sharing attributes with their original cards. Monster type is shown next to their level, hearts are most likely the HP, and the sword and shield icon is their attack and defense stats. The stars and the symbols to the right, I can't even try to guess. And the effects on the dice read like a different language.
Oh wait, I can't read.
I cannot tell what's good, bad, or mid. Like what the fuck does no family pros or cons even mean? I'm assuming black dice are the magic and trap cards of the game. They were the only dice I had that made the most sense to me so far. I leave to go to the shop to see how much cash I start the game with.
I'm broke, nigga, I'm broke!
I can actually buy a dice or two at the start. The problem is I have no idea what's even worth the cash. This shop kind of works like how a real life shop does. You put all the dice you want in a cart and from there you confirm whether you want all of it or not. There's some iconic monsters in the shop, but they seem pretty shitty. Jinzo with no effect and its attack and defense stats are horrendous compared to the other high star monsters I have.
Stinky! That shit is ass, boy.
With not many places left to check afterwards, I jump right into the free duel and nothing. There's no one here to duel. So this game works like Forbidden Memories where you only get access to duelists after beating them in tournament. So I go to the tournament mode. Several cups pop up for you to choose. I'ma assume the lunch cup is the starting cup. Now in these tournaments, all the opponents are classmates from the manga I assume. Several of them I recognize from the first series I think.
What the dog doing?
My first opponent was a kid that's terrified of yo-yos?
What?
Before a duel, it shows you a bio about the characters you duel in this game, which is pretty neat, but that's all you'll get in terms of any semblance of a narrative. Duels start with your deck masters popping up on the screen and
Girl, what's going on?
Alright, so over the course of this game, I slowly but surely learned what the mechanics were, but it's gonna be a mouthful, so bear with me here. On the left side of the screen is the crest counter. Having crest allows you to perform certain actions on the board. The actions take more counters depending on the effects or how much you're willing to pay. For example, if you want to move 3 spaces, you have to pay 3 movement crests. If you want to battle, you must pay an attack crest to swing. When someone attacks me, I can pay 1 guard crest to block and survive if I have enough defense. You gain crest by rolling the dice. Choose 3 die at the bottom here and you're good to go. The 2 spaces on the top can set the dies automatically depending on the crest and the monsters. So if you want to prioritize getting movement crest, you set it to movement and it will give you dies in your pool that will net you the most of the specific crest that you want. Each die has different stats and crests that you can gain when you roll them. Using the set can make the menu sifting a lot faster and was a great idea on the developer's part to add this. That alone makes this better to play than the physical game already. Unfortunately, it doesn't help much with the amount of time you have to sink into this game, but I'll get to that soon. Now let's talk about the dice and the monsters. Dice can be level 1 to 3 and all of them are 6-sided. The stats on the right show what faces the die has. When you roll a crest symbol, you add the crest to your crest counter. When you roll a star by itself, it doesn't do anything. But when you roll 2 to 3 dice and have 2 dice with the same level land on the star, you can summon one of the 2 dies. Level 1 die have 4 summon faces and 2 crest faces. Level 2 has 3 summon symbols and 3 crest symbols. Level 3 has 2 summon symbols and 4 crest symbols. So ideally, if you want to gain more crests, you roll level 3 dies. If you want to summon things fast, you roll level 1 dies. And level 2 dies are a nice balance between the two. As you can guess, level 1 dies are usually weak monsters. The higher the level, the stronger the die. On most occasions. I say most because there are some level 3 dice that completely suck ass. Jinzo, for example, is a level 3 dice with 1 HP, 10 attack, and 10 defense. His crest symbols are okay, I guess, but it's not enough to offset the negatives.
Wow, this is garbage.
Some dice have effects and also special abilities. Flying is an ability that's similar to flying in Magic the Gathering. They can't be attacked by most monsters in the game. However, they take twice the amount of movement crest to move. They're most useful to keep near your deck master to wall out the enemy dice. The only way they could be attacked in this game is by monsters with the arrow symbol. We'll just call it reach like it is in Magic the Gathering. It allows these monsters to attack flying ones. The last one is tunnel. These monsters go underground when moving on the board. This way they could go through enemy and ally units in the way. A sneaky and useful ability to use to get through units on the board and aim straight for the heart. I started to catch on what makes a dice good or bad at this point. A good example of a good dice is Battle Warrior. It's one of the best level 1 dice, not just in the start, but in the entire game. It has reach, 2 HP, 20 attack, and it also has the effect to add an attack crest to your counter when summoned. 20 attack is a good attack range that can tangle with a lot of higher level die. So at this point, I'd be looking for a level 1 die that either has 20 attack or 20 defense with about 2 HP. Level 2 monsters, I usually look for ones that have good crest signs or good effects. Swamp Battle Guard had an effect that raised his own attack by 10 in exchange for an attack crest. Flame Swordsman had no effect, but it had good stats and good crest faces. With level 3 die, you mostly looking for good crest faces since you can rarely summon these things. Also at this point, most of the level 3 die I've seen so far are either okay or ass. I finished the lunch tournament with ease. Now, in an effort to slowly understand the game, it took me an hour to beat the first opponent and 30 minutes for the rest. Soon after, games only took like 10 minutes, which would make you think that's a good thing. Far from the case. So before I start railing on the negatives of this game, and Dungeon Dice Monsters as a whole, let me speak on the strengths. This is probably one of the most unique tabletop games I've ever played. The potential of depth for Dungeon Dice Monsters is insane. It's literally build a tactical RPG. Even with the litany of RNG-like mechanics, the amount of skill and depth this game has could not be denied by just saying there's too much RNG. You have to make the map with the foresight of needing to build your path in a way where it will benefit you and inconvenience the opponent. You can only place dice next to the land you place yourself. The clearest strat being that you can build your side in a way to prevent your opponent from making a clear path by placing land as wide as possible. Or you could place land in a way where it leads straight to the heart of the opponent's space. What pieces you put in these lands play a bigger part. Do you want to have your flying monsters placed near you for defense, or sneak attack the opponent with hard to hit creatures? Do you want to place your tunnel monsters near you so you could catch pieces sneaking by, rushing for your life? Use them in the mid-range to snipe off problem pieces, or use them to sneak attack the opponent by passing through their defense. Choosing when to pick and choose when to roll for a resource in itself can be a difficult decision depending on the game state. I sometimes feel like more thought was put into the rules of this game than the official card game. The game seems complicated at first because the UI is intimidating, but the game is simple enough where I would argue that someone can understand this game faster than modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Something else that I really like in this game is the mental behind the resource management. Most actions cost a resource in order to do it. So potentially, you can force situations to make your opponent waste resource. There were a lot of situations where I would have pieces set up in a way to waste the opponent's movement and defense crest. And because there's not much guarantee on getting crest, it could end up in your favor that they don't recoup the resource you forced them to waste for a while. This game has so many mind games to offer. There's also type advantages in this game which plays a lot into your decision making. But now we have to speak on the negatives. This issue mostly applies to the in real life version, but it probably played a huge part in why people didn't want to play it often, and that's setting the game up. You need the pieces of the land to place on the board. The figures are needed too, but honestly I felt most people try to proxy the figures, but own the cards at least. You also had to keep track of your counters either by means that they gave you or something else. Those two things combined made for messy looking games and boards. The next issue is the pace of the games. Now, if you played the game with a human player, it always felt like the game was about 30 minutes plus at the least. By the time you finish one game of Dungeon Dice Monsters, you can finish a match in a card game. There is no way I can see tournaments for this game done in a timely fashion at all. Even with a best of 1, it will still be a nightmare to organize a tournament around this game. Now remember, I said 30 minutes at the least. This can be up to an hour depending on the roles you had the whole game. Now in the real life game, there's an option to opt for a smaller board. However, in the GPA game, you can't. Another issue this game has a lot of the time is the pace of the match. You'll have several turns at times where you just don't get the crest you need. There will be turns where you won't be able to summon a monster. This can happen to one or both players at any moment. Getting crests and summoning monsters is never that consistent at all. These turns suck, cause when you finally do get the roll you need, it won't even be much. If I summon a monster, cool, but I don't have enough resource to do anything with it. If I got a little bit of resource, that's cool too, but it's usually a small amount, not a big surplus. So I usually have to roll for multiple turns for more resources. My next issue is the dice designs, and I'm not just talking about the looks.
Oh, smell like shit.
It's comparable to like old school Yu-Gi-Oh in a way where that a lot of monsters just exist to suck. The issue on top of that is that a lot of the iconic cards are just straight up bad. A lot of them used to be effect monsters that just wound up with shitty stats and terrible crest faces and no effect. And since the dice pool in this game is so small, it's really noticeable when something sucks. Remember Battle Warrior? That dice feels mad overtuned compared to most of the level 1 dice overall. Most level 1s usually have stats like Sang in here and do compare him to a level 2 dice, he's absolutely better than half of them. And compare him to level 3 dice, he can literally still kill half of them. Look at the stats of this shitty level 3 dice Headhuntress. Why the fuck does it have 10 attack and defense? It can't even block Battle Warrior at all and it dies in one hit. You would think they would balance it out by giving it good crest faces, but nope, they're lackluster. You would think with such a small number of dice, they would balance the game better to at least make sense, but nope, just repeat the same silly issues the card game has. I didn't mention this before, and the reason why is because I didn't know they were a thing until near the end of the game, and that's 4-star dice. They are monsters with huge stats, but one summoning crest. Their main use is to just stock up the crest, cause you will rarely summon one. Unless you get lucky on the first roll, these dice are hardly worth summoning half the time. Now most of the issues I listed are issues with Dungeon Dice monsters in itself. My last issue is the game itself. This is probably the worst Yu-Gi-Oh game of all time. Damn near the worst game of all time. Now the game works exceptionally fine and is probably the preferred way to play Dungeon Dice monsters. But the single player content is atrocious. The only thing you could do is play tournament or fight specific duelists. No story of any kind whatsoever in the game. Okay, but you could be thinking, how is that different from the other games? You only duel till you get to the next level in the other games. I don't mind that, as long as the computer can play the game in good faith. The CPU in this game is absolute dog water. They do not understand the rules of the game. They also don't understand the nuance that this game can have. Every game has so many variables around every function that the computer can't logically think the same way a human can. For example, if your opponent only has one guard crest and 2 creatures side by side, while you have 2 creatures nearby, a human player will go and waste the guard crest the opponent has and kill the other monster. You put the computer in the same situation, it will not even try. The computer does not play the game with long-term investments in mind or understanding defensive and offensive nuances. The computer plays the game in complete bad faith. You can legit make a deck of Beaver Warriors and dice to get crests and beat the most difficult opponents in the game. All you have to do is dimension the dice to go straight for the opponent's life and that's it. The computer doesn't even try to stop the strategy to summon things to protect itself with. Instead, it will just keep on rolling level 3 and 4 dice and eating dick. Even if I gave them a chance, they still rarely played the game decently. This had to be the most boring game I covered on the channel so far because it didn't even feel like I was playing a game. The best part, my save file deleted itself twice. For some reason when I beat the game showed the credits and then erased all my progress. And if I dared to check on my dice, the game soft locks itself. You can't leave the dice pool menu unless you make a pool, and since I have no dice, I was stuck. You can't even buy new dice to prevent this because the game takes all your cash too. After the second time, I decided to use codes to unlock the post-game content. and it's nothing different. So the verdict is that this game is absolute ass. But DDM in itself is an awesome game, and it just needs like a few tweaks in order to make the pacing of the matches better. After playing the game, I was itching to play a human player. I was thinking that this game is solid enough for people to put some passion into it and have a community around it. So I tried to look up if there was any community for Dungeon Dice Monsters, and the results varied. You see, for starters, when you try to look up any semblance of Dungeon Dice Monsters, you'll get posts of people collecting physical game parts, which is nice and all, but I'm looking for people to sink some teeth into the game with online. Something else that pops up is the Steam community mod for the Tabletop Simulator. Someone gathered every resource of Dungeon Dice Monsters and made it readily available to play in Tabletop Simulator. This is probably one of the better ways to experience the game online. Issue I have here is that I didn't see anything like a community server or a thread of people gathering to play games on it. Looks like it's a lot of people that use this game for mostly just friends rather than strangers itching to play. While searching deeper, I found a Discord that's dedicated to tabletop gaming and has a mission to reboot and revive Dungeon Dice Monsters. It seems they're trying to gather people for Dungeon Dice Monsters to play over Tabletop Sim and maybe the GBA game on their uncle's Game Boy. Their interest in trying to do this depends on the amount of people willing to help out and support though. So if you want to try and give out a hand over there and trying to build a community around Dungeon Dice Monsters, this might be the best spot to do it. I'll have the link of the website in the description below. The last thing I found was someone trying to make their own version of Dungeon Dice Monsters and sell it using original assets and similar rules. I think at some point there was a demo out there via browser online. Issue is, in order to play the game now, you have to pay some crypto bullshit for it. It was apparently something added to the demo of the game later on. Much to the dismay of people who wanted this to be a thing, this decision stayed. And because of that, people placed their interests elsewhere and the production of the project just died. I'm actually shocked that no one decided to try and gather a community around this game. I'm constantly bombarded by the fact that random communities of niche games exist and would have thought that this would have spawned in the 10 plus years this game has been out. There's videos and a lot of comments of people saying that they love Dungeon Dice Monsters, but no one out there is really trying to host a place for people to play this game against other people online. I would have thought Tabletop Simulator would have had a Discord at least, but nope. I'm making a call here right now in hopes that someone gets inspired by this video to take the reins and makes a server for this game and breathes new life into it. I can't do it myself because I simply don't have the time to manage multiple communities like that, unless my Discord naturally became a DDM Discord, but I doubt that. When I made the Sacred Cards video, there was someone from a mod community of another game that found my video and liked it. Through that, they started to get inspiration to mod and make an updated version to Sacred Cards. The difficulty is being ramped up to be paced better and the decks of the opponents have changed on a wide scale. It's crazy to think that my small channel inspired such a change. This is one of the reasons I started to make a video series. Most card games don't have a mod scene at all. Most older card games don't have a way to play or find other people who enjoyed the game to play against at all. Which is crazy when you consider that there are games that are less known than Yu-Gi-Oh that have a big mod scene. I want people to reminisce and dig through their memory of these games. The more people that watch and enjoy videos like this, the bigger the chances that it will inspire someone along the lines to breathe new life into these games. Whether it's through modding or making a community around a niche game or anything really. It's an incredible feeling to know that something I made can have that kind of effect on the world. Thank you all for watching my video. The next game I'll cover is Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2004, followed up by Yu-Gi-Oh! Destiny Board Traveler, which will then be followed up by Magic the Gathering Chandelar, and then back to Yu-Gi-Oh! World Championship 2005. I'm trying to experience and show off as many card games that I can, that many missed out on and the ones that I missed out on as well. Cause card games as a whole are pretty fucking cool.